All right. Welcome, everybody, to our afternoon session here at the main stage. I hope all of you were able to participate this morning. We had some absolutely terrific speakers this morning, but now we have even better speakers this afternoon. And we're happy to welcome Congressman McNerney and Congressman Latta onto our stage here over the next few minutes. And I'll just do a brief introduction. I won't go through their bios. I'm sure all of you probably know their background. Congressman McNerney's from the 9th District in California, and we're really happy that he's been working with us, the GridWise Alliance, for the last 4 or 5 years on a Grid Innovation Caucus. And so we've done a number of different events with him, both in Washington, D.C. and out in California. And he understands this issue as well as any congressman does. And so, Congressman McNerney, we're going to welcome you to the stage and let you make a few opening remarks before we go into a discussion.
Well, good. Thank you very much for the brief introduction. And I want to thank the GridWise Alliance for having me. You know, it's always great to be here. I love to talk about the grid. I spent 20 years in renewable energy technology development, and it was a passion of mine, and still is. I also want to thank my colleague, Mr. Latta, for being a partner on the grid innovation and infrastructure issues, as well as other issues. It's important to have someone I can work with that shares my passion for the electrical infrastructure issues. So thank you, Bob. Today we're seeing increasing threats to the grid that are originating both from home and abroad. As we know, our energy grid touches every aspect of our lives. And so a reliable grid system is critical for both national security and for a clean energy future. But for lawmakers to enable innovative advancements that can improve security and reliability of our nation's grid, we must work on a bipartisan basis, and that's what we're doing. And we actively need to engage industry leaders, again, what we're trying to do today. Fortunately, the modernization and innovation of our electrical infrastructure is already underway. What was once a one-way delivery system has evolved into a very dynamic system where information and energy flows both ways. Technological advancements are also born from the need to secure the grid against disruptions brought about either by malicious intent or by Mother Nature. For example, technology allowing for the rerouting of power and quick response in the event of attacks is already being deployed across the grid. Cooperation among federal, state, and local governments is, of course, essential to protecting Americans and our national infrastructure. Given the growing number of cyber threats we're seeing today, it's more important than ever that Congress pursue policies that continue to foster these exciting developments and to support our grid infrastructure. This is an issue, again, that I'm very passionate about. Any vulnerable component is a threat to our physical and national security, making it very important that we invest in grid modernization and security. That's why I'm proud to co-chair the bipartisan Grid Innovation Caucus, along with my good friend from across the aisle, Representative Bob Latta, who you'll hear from in a minute. Together, we're focused on providing a forum for discussing solutions to the many challenges facing the grid and to educate members of Congress and their staff about the importance of electric grid to the economy, energy security, and advanced technologies being utilized to enhance grid capabilities. This work has informed our introduction of 2 bills on the topic, both of which passed out of the House of Representatives earlier this fall and are unfortunately awaiting action in the Senate. The aim of these 2 bills is to bolster America's electrical infrastructure by encouraging cooperation between the Department of Energy and the electric utilities. My bill, which I introduced along with Mr. Latta, it was H.R. 359, the Enhancing Grid Security through Public-Private Partnerships Act, would create a program to enhance the physical and cybersecurity of electric utilities by assessing security vulnerabilities, increasing cybersecurity training, and data collection. It would also require the interrupt cost estimate calculator, which is used to return the return on investment for utilities, to be updated at least every 2 years to make sure that it's accurate. Mr. Latta's bill, which he introduced along with me, H.R. 360, the CyberSense Act, makes important headway in protecting our critical grid infrastructure. The CyberSense Act would create a program to identify cyber-secure products for the bulk power grid through a testing and verification program. The bulk power system supports American industry and provides all the benefits of reliable electric power to the American people. It's essential that we make this system as secure as possible, as cyber attacks pose a serious threat to the grid. Any vulnerable component in the grid is a threat to our security, and this bill will go a long way to securing our system. There's also H.R. 4447, the Clean Economy, Jobs, and Innovation Act, which passed out of the House of Representatives early this fall and makes long overdue reforms to the U.S. energy policy and authorizes major investments in the transition to a low carbon future. H.R. 4447 does include $3.5 billion in grants for projects that harden the grid against climate change and improves the resiliency and security of the grid, resiliency being a top objective for future grids. I hope that the Senate will be able to pass their energy package during this lame duck session, enabling us to go to conference with that and get H.R. 4447 signed into law. I'm also looking forward to working with the incoming Biden administration. The president-elect has signaled a desire to prioritize the modernization of the grid, which is a great advancement. It will take many technologies with many different use cases tailored for the different regions of the country that will make our grid more resilient. The Committee on Energy and Commerce, which I'm proud to serve on, is uniquely positioned to play a pivotal role in putting America on a path to better securing our electric utility system. So that's my spiel today. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure, and be sure to invite me back. I'll always have more to say.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And Congressman Latta, I invite you to join us on the stage. Thank you very much, and we'll turn it to you. Congressman Latta is from the 5th District in Ohio, and has also been a tremendous support for the work that we've been trying to do over the last few years with regard to grid innovation and grid infrastructure. Congressman?
Well, thanks very much for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank the GridWise Alliance for allowing me to address you all today with my good friend, Jerry McNerney, because we've been working together on these issues for several years now. And before I begin, because Jerry touched on it, you know, we both serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And one of the things I always tell folks is when you're sitting up on at Energy and Commerce and looking out at the people that are testifying before us, we're looking at the innovators and the entrepreneurs out there that are really 5 to 10 years ahead of what we might be in the Congress. So it's always important that we're doing absolutely everything we possibly can to hear from you, so that we can write the best pieces of legislation for the future. Because again, we don't want to hamper that investment. We don't want to hamper the entrepreneurs or the innovators out there. So I want to thank you all very much for what you do and what it does mean for us. And, you know, my district's unique. I represent Northwest, West Central Ohio. I go halfway down the Indiana line and underneath Michigan, and have about the northwest quadrant of the state. But I have an interesting district in that I have about 60,000 manufacturing jobs, so we use a lot of energy. So I'm out all the time meeting with our energy producers, those who supply the energy, and the work that has to be done today, especially making sure that the grid is upgraded, that there's the cyber out there, and the amount of money that has to be invested yearly to get this done is, I mean, incredible. So I want to thank you all for what you all do out there right off the bat, because it's so important for what we're going to see. Because over the last quarter century, you know, we've seen absolutely incredible changes to the way we communicate with the rest of the world and the way we engage in business. And along with these changes, we've also seen innovation in technologies in that power of society, resulting in a more efficient and streamlined electric grid. Unfortunately, the promise of a more interconnected society also means that we must address the challenges and the vulnerabilities that arise with it. Yeah, thankfully, when President Trump came into office, he recognized how vital it was to increase protection to the bulk electric power system and other critical energy infrastructure that we have. So I applaud the administration for their efforts and have sought out ways that we can be helpful to execute this mission. And as I said, it's been great to be working with my good friend and colleague from California, Jerry McNerney, to introduce the two bills that he went and explained a little bit about already on security and also in the innovation and upgrades that we have to have. And as he mentioned, the first bill, again, not to repeat, but I think it's important to remember what they are, because again, we want to get these bills signed into law, is the Enhancing the Grid Security through Public-Private Partnerships Act, which would direct the DOE to facilitate and encourage public-private partnerships in order to improve cybersecurity of our electric utilities. In the second bill, HR 360, the Cyber Sense Act, will create a voluntary DOE Cyber Sense program that would identify and promote the products that are out there to making sure that we have a cyber secure bulk power system. And again, that's important for our companies out there, so they know when they're buying that they're getting what they need to have, and they're not going to have to worry about what we're looking at on the telecom side with rip and replace. So we've had previously brought these two bills out in the last Congress, and as Jerry had mentioned earlier, these bills have passed out in September. And so we really need to work with our friends over in the Senate to get these bills done before we go sine die for the year. And that's it for this Congress. So we really want to make sure that the Senate works on these pieces of legislation and get them done. And, as Jerry also mentioned, that, besides our legislative efforts, it's also important that we have co-chaired the bipartisan Grid Innovation Caucus for several Congresses now. And that goal is, very straightforward: to provide a forum for discussing solutions to the many challenges facing the electric grid, and to educate members of Congress and their staff about the importance of the grid in relations to the economy, energy security, and advanced technologies being utilized to enhance grid capabilities. And so I'm very, very proud of the bipartisan work that we've done on this. And again, we want to make sure that we have that economic growth and that security. And so we're putting that way above politics. And so we've seen such great things happen when we can work together. And again, as I said, that the caucus works for a public-private sectors to work together so we can move forward, because we want to make sure that we have the grid that we need for the future. And we want to make sure we help find ways for the energy sector to deal with the negative consequences of the coronavirus pandemic. And there have been several different approaches offered to try to save jobs in the energy sector and help customers afford to pay their electricity bills, to keep the power on at home and into a lot of these small businesses. So we need to keep working together in a bipartisan manner as we combat the COVID-19, and we look for other ways that we can work in a bipartisan together as a public-private sectors. So again, I want to thank the GridWise Alliance for inviting me to address you all. But I really want to say this, our doors are always open. We always are here to hear from you. And we have to have these ideas from you as we advance really good pieces of legislation as we go into the 117th Congress. So again, thanks very much for allowing me to be on today, and have a great day and remainder of the year, and happy holidays. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Do you have time for a few questions?
Well, we'll try.
Okay. And we may have lost Congressman McNerney, but they're trying to see if they can get him back on stage to join us. And I don't have any hard questions. I just have some easy questions for you. And both of you have referred to the legislation that the House has passed already this year, but as you know, it's not getting very far in the Senate so far, and the Senate's got a lot on its plate these days. What can you forecast at all what you think, assuming we don't get an energy bill yet in this lame duck session, what do you think next year looks like? Will you revisit the energy issues in a comprehensive bill, or how will that work?
Well, I think it's important first, that we have these individual pieces of legislations out there. We have to combine them. But, hopefully we can do as the beginning of a Congress is this. We've had great bipartisan support on these two pieces of legislation. And what you can do then is, work with our Committee on Energy in Congress and say, look, these are bipartisan pieces of legislation. We got them out in a bipartisan manner in the last Congress. Let's get those done right off the bat, get them on the floor, get them over to the Senate so they can have them early.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that's one way we can do it. But hopefully we won't be in that situation that we get these bills past this Congress, go over to the Senate.
Yeah, let's hope. Well, and as I'm sure Senator Barrasso will be taking over as chair of the Energy Committee on the Senate side. And do you have any thoughts in terms of his priorities or working with him, and how you think that might make it easier or not as easy?
Well, I guess I always look at it this way. We always want to work with our Senate colleagues. We have always reached out to them when we have legislation, or when we have legislation that we're in with that we're going to introduce in both chambers at the same time to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, I think that we can have a very good working relationship with the senator as he comes in as chairman. And we want to make sure, though, again, that I always think it's a great idea to sit down and talk with the members over there as to what our priorities are and to hear from them. And also make sure that our staffs are working together, because that's very important too, because as the staffs work together, they can communicate as we move the piece of legislation through each chamber.
Yeah. We found your staff and many of the other staffs very receptive to talking with us and listening to, especially some of our industry members that have a lot going on in your district and other districts. Do you have any sort of final thoughts in terms of, to the companies that are listening out there? Many of them are utilities, many of them are vendors that serve utilities. What else could we be doing as an industry to help you be more successful?
Well, that's a great question, because, especially almost over the last 9 months here, that we've been shut down, meaning nobody's coming into these buildings.
Right.
But it's really important, what I'm a firm believer in. I've got to be out in my district and across the state, and also working with the industries that we have jurisdiction over in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I say this, please invite us out. Show us what you're doing. And because again, I'm a big visual learner. I can, when I see things and I can take it back with me, I can ask much better questions in committee. Yeah. You can challenge things, what we need to get done. But I would, don't be afraid to have members of Congress come into the industries. I've been out standing in some very cold situations and some very windy days in Ohio in the middle of the winter, looking at different projects or things that companies are working on. And but that's I think that's very important. So I highly recommend and encourage businesses to ask us to come out. And then because again, we can also do maybe joint visits. We could do through the committee. We could have other members and staff come out and maybe do a day or two in a couple of states. But that's very, very helpful for us as we work on legislation. Yeah.
I guess one last question, and I know I'm getting a message they're trying to get Congressman McNerney back in, but let me ask you one question, and then if he doesn't make it back in, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the next panel, Congressman. But this year in particular, as you know, there's been more hurricanes than ever in the Gulf, and in fact, it seems like there was just a pretty serious one, maybe only a couple of weeks ago, right? And so obviously that gets our attention in terms of grid reliability. But what's new this year, which is a little different, is the wildfires out on the West Coast. So not just California, which is maybe where it's been the worst, but in Oregon and Washington as well. And I've heard pleas from at least one of the governors that we need more investment in grid infrastructure to help help with the wildfire issues. Do you have any thoughts on either or both the hurricane reliability issues or the wildfire reliability issues?
Well, whenever we look at these issues, we always got to remember, in your case, you got to, deliver that power.
Yeah.
And, I just was talking to someone here today on the Hill, talking about out in California, why certain products aren't being shipped because they're way behind because of the wildfires that they experience. So, we really want to make sure that, that the power comes on, that, you all know what you have to do it. There's a lot of Americans that when they flip that switch in the morning, it's like a miracle every day. There's electricity. But it's when you think about that generation and how you got to get it to the consumer, to the company out there that utilizes it, it's absolutely essential. So that's why I think it's with the Grid Innovation Caucus and working with and making sure that you have what you have to have. It's so important. So again, I look forward to working with you all in the next Congress.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Congressman.
Well,
I know you have a lot going on. You probably have some votes yet today, so we'll let it ride there. And we wish Congressman McNerney could have gotten back on with us, but we'll catch him down the road. And I'm sure we'll have many more chances to interact with you in the future. So thank you very much, and we'll let you go now, and we'll turn it over to Andrew is going to come on. Andrew Shaw is going to come on and introduce our next panel.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Shaw. I'm a partner at Dentons. Honored to serve as the moderator for the next panel. It does look like we have Congressman McNerney who is back in. So I may, maybe we can pause for a second before we delve into the next panel in case Steve wants to ask a question or two to Congressman McNerney.
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. Thanks for coming back on. Sorry, we had some maybe technical difficulties there. I'll just have one question for you, and then, or maybe a couple of short questions, and then we'll let you get back to your other business that you have. So I was just talking with Congressman Latta about reliability issues, and of course, this year is a little bit new for us because of the wildfires on the West Coast, and we've not really viewed that necessarily as a reliability issue so much in the past, but obviously this year it's become a big issue for not just California, but Oregon and Washington and some others as well. So do you have any thoughts about what we need to be thinking about or doing with regard to reliability and wildfires?
Well, it's clear that we need to continue to upgrade the grid so that when we were having these public safety power shutdowns, which are planned shutdowns to prevent sparking from causing additional fires, which have been so devastating in the past. So we need to make sure that we continue to invest in the infrastructure to prevent or to lower the scope or reduce the scope of those shutdowns and reduce the time that they are required to be off. I think that would be the most important thing that we can do. But also another very important thing is to work with the communication system. When the power goes down, then we have communication shutdowns as well. And so we need to make sure that the communication networks, the cell towers and the networks are backed up with power so that people can receive emergency notifications and updates on the status of the emergency. So those are, I think, the most important things that we could do right now.
Okay. Well, last question for you, and I asked this of Congressman Latta as well, which is we're now going into a new administration and a new Congress with a bit different makeup. Senator Barrasso will be taking over the Energy Committee on the Senate side. And assuming you don't get a bill passed in the lame duck session, which is probably not real likely at this point, how do you see it changing going forward into 2021? And what are the opportunities that you see to do more in this space.
Well, I mean, there is a really good opportunity for cooperation on a bipartisan cooperation, because neither side can get anything done without the cooperation of the other side. And we both see incredible need for infrastructure investment. Both sides see that. It's real clear. And we have an administration that's probably more than likely to be interested in seeing progress in those issues. So I see a bigger opportunity at this point, and I'm certainly glad that I have a partner like Bob Latta that is anxious to work with me and get these things done. And we're also, the fact that I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee is very helpful, because it's this committee in the House that has the jurisdiction and the wherewithal to make sure we move forward on these issues. So I'm optimistic. I think we can get a lot done.
Good. Well, we are too, and we thank you so much for your leadership and ability to work with us and willingness to listen and be part of what we're doing going forward. So we'll let you get back to your job, and thank you again for your leadership on these issues.
Well,
and
it's always a pleasure to talk about
thanks, Congressman. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Andrew to introduce the rest of our panel.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Steve. I think the rest of our panel looks like everybody is here. So thanks so much, and appreciate everybody tuning in. As Steve said, I'm Andrew Shaw. I'm a partner at Dentons, where I advise clients in the energy sector on federal legislative and regulatory issues. I'm really honored to be moderating this great panel, and it's wonderful too to follow the comments by Congressman McNerney and Congressman Latta. It's always encouraging, particularly when it comes to energy policy, which is close to my heart, to see great bipartisan leaders, and hearing their comments, I think is a great intro into our discussion. I'm going to do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll dive right into it. I'll start with Lisa Jacobson. Lisa is the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. In this role, Lisa advises states and federal policymakers on energy tax, air quality, and climate change policy. She is a member of the Department of Energy's State Energy Efficiency Steering Committee, the USTR's Trade and Environment Policy Advisory Committee, the Energy Efficient Global Alliance Steering Committee, and the Gas Technology Institute's Public Interest Advisory Committee. She's testified before Congress and also worked on the Hill before joining the council. Next, we have Kathryn Steckelberg, who is the Vice President of Government Relations at the Edison Electric Institute. She leads the Government Relations Group, which is responsible for public policy advocacy before Congress in various federal agencies. She's worked on a wide variety of legislative priorities for the industry, including the Energy Policy Act of 2005, the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, and tax legislation over the last several years. She also worked on Capitol Hill, serving as a legislative assistant and legislative director for Representative Jack Kemp. Finally, we have Aaron Severn with the American Wind Energy Association. He is currently the Senior Director for Federal Affairs. And in this role, he works with the association's Federal Affairs Committee, covering a wide variety of issues. He has helped to secure important legislative victories for AWEA related to tax policy, federal appropriations, and siting and wildlife issues. Aaron also worked on the Hill, serving as a legislative assistant for former Senator Kent Conrad, a Democrat from North Dakota. Wanted to thank the panel. I know everyone's busy, and appreciate them all making time to be with us today. Kind of following upon the previous two speakers, we know that next year, irrespective of what the outcome is of the two runoff elections in Georgia, that the margins in both chambers are going to be really tight. And with that, it seems as though bipartisan cooperation is going to be essential to getting anything done in 2021. So with that, I wanted to ask the group what they thought as the best opportunities for progress next year on energy policy. And maybe we'll start with Lisa.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And it's great to be with Kathy and with Aaron. And I really welcome this conversation. Couldn't be at a better time as we're all thinking about what we can accomplish in the next week, week and a half. And that will be a big week and a half. So we should discuss that, and then trying to think about where we can start when the 117th Congress begins. I think just briefly, yes, we will continue to be in divided government, and that presents both challenges and opportunities. But I think we would all agree that when it comes to energy policy, it can be bipartisan. It has been bipartisan when it's been enacted into law, and we really want to see durable policies. So when Congress acts, we want it to last. So when I think about the 117th Congress, even not thinking about, the individual races or how tight the margins might be in either chamber, I think about what's worked in the past and how do we build on it. And when I look back over the last couple of decades, I see clearly that, research, development, and deployment policies have secured bipartisan support. And we've seen in the last several years support from Congress on a bipartisan basis for those types of efforts increase and expand. I've also seen tax policy be a major bipartisan way to influence investment in the energy sector, and it's been quite effective, especially when we have long-term tax policies that mirror the investment cycles of energy projects. What I would like to see more of are updating of market rules, and some of that Congress can play a role in, and in other cases it may be Congress in partnership with federal agencies. This conference in and of itself, and just talking about grid modernization and the essential features of the grid and what we want to protect reliability and resiliency right now, and what we're going to need from the grid in the future. It's clear that we need to be thinking about how investment and policy can make that next wave of efforts come to fruition. So the bipartisan view of the prioritization of those issues is key. And I'm sure others will talk more about infrastructure legislation, which we're hearing a lot about right now, which could be a driver for some of those investments and policy updates. BCSE will clearly be looking at those opportunities too. But maybe just to kind of go back to the first comment I made, this is a critical time over the next couple of weeks. We've not given up hope that there can't be opportunities to advance forward-looking energy policy before Congress adjourns. We talked a little bit about the energy bill, the American Energy and Innovation Act. The members of Congress spoke about that, as well as other energy bills that have impact to the grid and that they have been leaders on, that have bipartisan support. Don't know if we can get all that done, but my hope is that we can advance as much of what has strong bipartisan support and has been worked on this Congress now, so that when we do come together in January, we can build on that.
Well, thanks, Lisa. Kathy, do you want to offer some thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lisa that clean energy technology, RD&D, is a bipartisan issue. We've heard a lot of support for that from both sides of the aisle. Like Lisa, I really hope that Congress can wrap up an energy bill this year that would include a lot of those provisions, so we don't have to start them all over again next year. So that's obviously, I think, an area where they can work together. As Congressman Latta and McNerney just demonstrated, grid security is very much a bipartisan issue. We've seen that consistently, that we take grid security extremely seriously with our member companies. Congress does too. So that, I think, is an area where they can work together. And then I also think another big priority for us has been electric transportation. And we saw a lot of electric transportation provisions in both the House and the Senate transportation bills. Unfortunately, they didn't get those across the finish line. But you know, I think that's a good starting point for next year as well.
Well, thanks, Kathy. Aaron, do you want to offer some opening thoughts?
Yeah, a few specifics that I think we could see next year. So there's the Public Lands Renewables Renewable Energy Development Act, which is basically to improve siting in public lands to promote renewables. That's something that has been supported on a bipartisan basis. There's a tremendous amount of bipartisan support for offshore wind development, so both through the tax code as well as things like workforce development. Lisa mentioned general tax credits. I think that's another area that's ripe. Other priorities like energy storage. So the energy storage tax, investment tax credit is another one that I could see move forward. And I guess, you know, I'm generally optimistic on transmission. Certainly, you know, the cost allocation in the siting is more challenging, but, you know, I could see them making some progress in making some improvements with transmission planning as well.
Well, thanks, Aaron. And maybe to follow up on some of these introductory comments, the infrastructure keeps coming up both in this initial discussion and throughout the news and looking ahead to 2021. We talked a little bit about siting, Aaron referenced that, and looking in electric vehicles. And I guess I was heartened earlier this session when the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee passed out a big surface transportation bill that included a big EV title. Mm-hmm. I guess as we look ahead to next year, how do you see this debate on infrastructure as it relates to the grid kind of playing out?
Well, I'm happy to start. I think, as you noted, we have a strong base to look at, and I think between what was done on a bipartisan basis unanimously by the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee last summer is one very important piece to look at. Then we can look at what the House worked on over this past year in particular with the Moving America Forward framework and the other infrastructure proposals that it advanced. And you see a very comprehensive set of policies that are inclusive of, you know, sustainable transportation, climate change, you know, in particular, you know, with the Senate legislation and had a whole title addressing climate and resilience issues. So across the board, it's a very comprehensive look at infrastructure. And I think from all of our points of view, number one, we're really happy that energy is in the conversation, because in some conversations in the past, it really had been a more limited view. But energy is critical infrastructure and it powers all other critical infrastructure. So we need to be considered. I also think, as we know, infrastructure has been viewed as an economic driver and the ability to invest in physical infrastructure, but also human capital and create jobs. So when we bring the energy sector into the conversation, there's more opportunities for job creation in the future. So I think overall, it's clearly we have a need, or we have aging infrastructure, we have new demands on our infrastructure that need to be met. So we need investment and we need new policy support. But a question will be, you know, as it was in, you know, this conversation at the beginning of this Congress, what will the scope be and what will the reaction be to the investments that are needed to get the job done? So I think there is broad support, as there has been, for the concept of a big infrastructure package. But then, you know, as we get further along, definitely the question about cost has been a big factor. I think what's a little different now, obviously, is that we're also thinking about the COVID recovery scenario, and that might provide more opportunity to have strategic investments on a larger scale. But I think that's still the biggest question. What will be the mood of Congress when we come back in January? And what will the economy need? And how can that be leveraged through an infrastructure proposal?
Yeah, I mean, and infrastructure has always been a bipartisan issue. Everybody loves infrastructure investment. The biggest problems that you run into is when you start talking about how much you're going to spend on it, and even more importantly, how you're going to pay for it. And it's how you pay for it where things usually seem to fall apart. But I mean, certainly we have a lot of interest in the infrastructure, electric transportation, the grid, and so, you know, we'd love to see an infrastructure bill get across the finish line, but they always seem to get bogged down in how you pay for it. Aaron raised the issue of transmission. We need to be able to get transmission built, sited within a timely period. I mean, we can't take 10 years to build a transmission line to be able to get power from one area of the country to another. So being able to deal with the siting and permitting process is incredibly important. But that always gets really tricky with our industry, because then you're talking about state commission jurisdiction. And, you know, they feel very protective of that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. You know, the only thing I would add is that I think what's encouraging is that infrastructure seems to be more and more broadly defined. I think a few years ago, you said infrastructure, it was more just sort of roads and bridges, but now it incorporates the grid. I think another big priority of ours is to make sure that we have the port infrastructure, because that's going to be very crucial to making sure that the U.S. stays competitive with the offshore wind sector. Especially our East Coast ports are really, they really are not where they need to be in order to facilitate the growth of offshore wind that we're expecting. So that would be another important element.
Well, thank you. And kind of implicit in all this discussion of infrastructure is stimulus. And, you know, I think it's too early for us to know exactly how a COVID stimulus bill next year might work in tandem or together with an infrastructure bill. But, you know, we are in this position, and it seems a little bit like deja vu. You know, in 2009, we had a new Democratic president coming in with a economy in really tough shape, and we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus bill, which had pretty significant investments in grid modernization in the energy sector. As we look back on the Obama era stimulus bill, are there lessons learned that Congress and the administration can take forward to next year?
Our member companies took advantage of some programs in ARRA that provided money for smart meters. And, you know, I think a lot of them were facing some skepticism at the state commission level about making those kind of investments. So certainly being able to do federal matching dollars really helped a lot of our companies be able to go back to their state commissions and say, okay, you know, we've got some federal dollars here, you know, can we proceed with these plans? And so they were able to get permission from a lot of the state commissions. And I think that was a very successful investment. I do know that companies probably weren't necessarily used to dealing with all of the red tape that comes with federal dollars. So that was kind of an interesting experience. I think one of the things that kind of haunted that whole program was the Solyndra experience with loan guarantees. But I think the simple reality, and I'm not necessarily sure that people have really learned this lesson, you are going to make investments that don't necessarily pan out. But that's part of the process of getting you from the research and development stage in some technologies to basically deployment and commercialization of them. And not every technology you try and take through that process is going to be a success. But I think that was one of the unfortunate lessons that some people did take away is, oh, well, we don't want to really do that again. But certainly, I mean, we had a good experience with it, and it can be really helpful to our member companies if they are trying to move forward with some technologies that their state commissions may be a little skeptical of, or, given the number of investments our companies are making, being able to partner with the federal government and have some cost sharing programs can be really helpful in being able to move forward with a number of these investment projects.
I would just add to that another similarity, although it's not nearly as bad as it was back in 2009, but our industry continues to face serious challenges with tax equity. And so the Recovery Act established the 1603 grant program essentially to help companies monetize the tax credits that they just couldn't use when so many of those, the big investment banks collapsed. And so I think that's an important lesson. That was a hugely effective program. I think without it, the industry really would have seen a really pretty significant and dramatic downturn. There were also some really good R&D programs for things like blade testing, and there was a drivetrain facility at Clemson University that's proven to be very beneficial. But I would also echo Kathy's point. I think optics really matter. So it just takes one company to tarnish an entire program, and I think that just points to the need to make sure that it's done on a bipartisan basis to try to get the buy-in needed for any programs. So but I think if it's done that way, it could be they could replicate many of the effective programs that they did back in 2009.
I would just add a couple of points. A guidepost for us is look back at what has worked, and certainly what we hear from those that were recipients of funding and those that were implementing the fund, the strategies to invest from ARRA was when we had current authorities and kind of confidence in a particular endeavor or program, they were going to be much more successful. Secondly, one of the things that we've really been trying to emphasize is public-private partnerships. How do we leverage whatever federal investments are made for economic recovery with private sector dollars and make this a much bigger and more transformative effort? And then, jobs. A big part of the need for a stimulus is because there are many workers that are hurting and families that are hurting. When we look at the energy sector and we look at what's happened with COVID, we see a significant amount of the job losses still in the residential sectors of the industries. So whether they be in the energy efficiency industry or they be in other renewable or clean energy programs, there's still a lot of pain there. So how do we make sure that we are appropriately looking at whatever programs and investments we make to really target them to those that are in need? And that may change. It clearly could change over the next several weeks, and it could change in the months ahead as Congress is considering what it needs to do related to economic recovery. So, focus on what works, leverage private sector dollars as much as you can, and then really be looking at who is in the most need as we're putting this. If we do go forward with an economic recovery or infrastructure proposal, make sure that those guideposts are in mind.
Well, thank you. One other question that I would be curious to get folks' thoughts on, and several of you referenced it, is tax policy. I know it's important to all of your members. I thought maybe folks could spend a little bit talking about the importance of long-term certainty with respect to some of the energy tax incentives and thoughts on the ability to get a potential legislation to provide that. I am harking back to 2015 when there was divided government, and we did get some certainty, at least for 5 years, with respect to some of the renewable tax credits. Aaron, you want to jump in first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally we would like to see something like the Clean Energy for America Act that Senator Wyden has proposed. So this is a carbon-based technology neutral tax credit. That's where the credit's basically based on your carbon emissions. In our view, this would establish the long-term certainty. It kind of brings everything under one framework. So I think what's hard now is, you have different credits for different technologies. They're structured slightly differently. They expire at different times. So I think that generally just getting, a streamlined framework could be really helpful. Unfortunately, it feels a little bit more aspirational looking ahead to the next Congress. But I don't see, it does seem like there's a little bit at least of, on the House side, them kind of coming around and maybe considering this idea as opposed to, 5-year extensions of the existing credits like was included in the Green Act. And I think it, could really present an opportunity for working across the aisle, because this would include carbon capture and storage. It would include nuclear. So, if we were to design the framework, I think it would be pretty close to what Senator Wyden is suggesting.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of echo what Aaron's saying. I mean, having stable tax policy is incredibly important. And these, 1-year extensions, and then you have a fight over extending them again. If all of us had to deal with that when we were doing our own taxes, it would drive us crazy. So having something that's long-term and stable, and I've spent most of this past year working on a carbon-free technology initiative with a number of the NGO groups, and we're looking at a lot of different technologies that will help our member companies achieve their long-term climate goals. Well, you don't want to go up to the Hill and say, hey, we need 11 new tax credits for all these technologies that we're going to need. So being able to do some type of technology neutral tax credits would just really, really simplify things. So that is something that we're looking at and really hoping to be able to push next year so that we're not dealing with this hodgepodge of tax credits for the technologies that we need.
We're getting a couple questions from the audience. So let me ask one, and it's something that Lisa mentioned as far as public-private partnerships, P3s. The question was kind of the approach in rural areas where it may be challenging to attract private investment. Lisa, any thoughts on that question?
Well, I mean, obviously it's extremely important. And if we have a new moment to look at the federal policy levers we have, we need to continue to reach out to rural communities. And I know, we have a number of members where that's their primary constituency. And so, I think, especially given the scope of what we want to accomplish potentially in the next Congress, that they need to be integrated into whatever approaches are there, and may need some special projects that suit the needs of those communities. But I think, again, we're kind of at a reset moment, and we have an opportunity to do a better job perhaps than we have in the past.
We know that next year it's not going to just be Congress, that a lot of action is going to be coming from the executive branch. And we know that there's going to be a lot of focus on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Transmissions come up several times in our discussion. It seems like it's going to be a top priority for the likely chairman, Richard Glick. It would be good just to get some thoughts from the group on what FERC could do to be able to incentivize the transmission that we need with respect to meeting clean energy goals going forward.
They need to revisit Order 1000 and deal with some lingering issues there. And I think they all recognize it. They've talked about it. And I think it is very important to Commissioner Glick to try and do that, along with taking additional actions in the RTOs and ISOs to help advance clean energy. That's been a priority of his for a long time. So, but I do think trying to straighten out Order 1000 would be a big help on the transmission front.
Yeah, I completely agree with Kathy on that one. And, you know, I think that Commissioner Glick would be likely to, you know, try to strike a better balance between state clean energy policies and, you know, FERC's regulation of markets. The other piece I could see them, you know, doing some more on is maybe a rulemaking to expand capacity on existing lines. That's something that I've heard Commissioner Glick talk about as well. So I think there's an opportunity to make some advancement there.
We mentioned this in the previous session with Congressman Latta and Congressman McNerney. We will have new Republican leadership on some of the key committees, not just in the Senate on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and the Environment Public Works Committee, but also on the House with Kathy McMorris-Rodgers serving as ranking member on Energy and Commerce. As we kind of close up this session, just thought I would get some thoughts from the group on the new Republican leadership and what that might mean for energy policy next year.
Well, Chairman Barrasso is obviously already a chairman, having served with the EPW committee. So he certainly brings a wealth of experience in terms of chairing a committee. And he's been very active on a lot of energy related issues. He's been a big champion of advanced nuclear RD&D. I mean, as we've talked before, he worked with ranking member Carper on a very large infrastructure package. So I think he's going to step into that role, and assuming we don't get an energy bill before the end of the year, I think his priorities in RD&D space will be very much in keeping with where the committee has been for quite some time. And then both Senator Capito and, Representative Kathy McMorris-Rodgers have a lot of experience with energy issues. So I think they're all going to be able to step into new roles and really do a good job and really address a lot of the issues that those committees have been dealing with for quite some time. I mean, Representative McMorris-Rodgers has talked quite a bit about the need for clean energy innovation. So that's been a very strong plank for the House Republicans, and I think an area where they can do a lot of work with the Democrats. I mean, we saw a lot of the RD&D bills that came out of the House Science Committee this past Congress. They were bipartisan. And so I'd like to think that tradition is going to continue.
Yeah, and I would just add that Senator Barrasso has been very supportive of trying to do more to develop transmission on public lands and streamlining the permitting process. And, Representative McMorris-Rodgers also agree with Kathy. I mean, she's very much, she believes in the benefits of renewables and certainly has acknowledged that climate change is a problem that needs to be addressed. So she might, not support mandates, but certainly I think there's some opportunities for some bipartisan leadership there.
I don't really have much more to add. I mean, I'm optimistic and hopeful, and I think we're going to have big challenges ahead of us, but energy is really in the center of a lot of the solutions to those challenges. So that it gives me confidence and hope and ready to roll up our sleeves and work.
Well, thank you very much to the panelists. This was a wonderful discussion and appreciate everyone's perspectives. Like everyone, I'm looking forward to the year to come. Energy's never been, at least in my lifetime, a central part of the discussion. So I think it's going to be an exciting and challenging year, and looking forward to it. So thanks again to the panelists and to GridWise Alliance.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.